student debt. What's their response to this ruling?
Yeah, that's right. Well, they feel that the president should use all the tools at his disposal to try to continue this debt relief program in
Nicole,
some
I'm
form or fashion.
Sorry to have to interrupt
you.
Yes, we're going to go now to that network special report. We'll check back in.
This is a CBS News special report. I'm John Dickerson in Washington. President Biden is set to make his first remarks after the Supreme Court ruled against his administration's student loan forgiveness program. In a 6-3 decision, the court threw out the president's plan to cancel $430 billion in student loan debt for up to 43 million Americans. The conservatives' 6 justices said the administration and the Secretary of Education overstepped its authority in trying to cancel or reduce student loans without going through Congress. Writing for the majority and referring to the legislation the president thought gave him the opportunity to do this, Chief Justice John Roberts wrote, "The HEROES Act provides no authorization for the Secretary's plan, even when examined using the ordinary tools of statutory interpretation, let alone clear congressional authorization for such a program." In her dissent, Justice Elena Kagan wrote, "From the first page to the last, today's opinion departs from the demands of judicial restraint. The majority overrides the combined judgment of the legislative and executive branches, with the consequence of eliminating loan forgiveness for 43 million Americans." In addition to today's news, millions of Americans were already preparing to begin repaying student loan debt this fall after the years-long pandemic-related pause. Here now is President Biden. Let's listen.
There you go, Mr. Secretary. Let me begin by saying I know there are millions of Americans in this country who feel disappointed and discouraged or even a little bit angry about the court's decision today on student debt. And I must admit I do too. Before I tell you the steps we're going to take and want to talk about what we've been able to, I want to talk about what we've been able to achieve so far on student loan over the past few years. First, we made the largest increase in Pell Grants in over a decade, helping students from families who nearly all make less than $60,000 a year. Then we fixed the so-called, with the help of the department, Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. So the borrowers who got into public service, such as school teachers, police officers, social workers, service members, they actually got the debt relief they were entitled to under the law. Before I came to office, only 7,000 people had benefited from that program. Today, over 600,000 borrowers have received relief from that program. And it's still available. So many more people can be helped. And I encourage you to apply if you haven't already. You're still eligible. Go to studentaid.gov. It matters. Third, my administration improved the program from the Obama-Biden administration on income-driven repayment plan. That's what it was referred to as. Back then, we set a limit. Student borrowers would pay no more than 10% of their disposable income to pay back their debt at any one time. My administration is going to reduce that to 5%. It's now the most generous repayment program ever. No one with an undergraduate loan today or in the future, whether from a community college or a four-year college, will have to pay more than 5% of their disposable income to repay their loan. And that's income after you pay for the necessities like housing, food, and the like. Typical borrower is going to save about $1,000 a year. And if you keep up payments for 20 years without missing them, your total debt is forgiven after 20 years. That's what the program was before, but we've just reduced it to 5%. In addition to that, last year I announced my student debt relief plan, a plan that was on the verge of providing more than 40 million Americans with real debt relief, up to $10,000 for many borrowers and up to $20,000 for those who had gotten a Pell Grant. Nearly 90% of the relief would have gone to borrowers, 90% of it, making less than $75,000 a year, and no one making over $125,000 would qualify. This program was all set to begin. The website had been set up, the applications had been simplified so that it took less than 5 minutes to complete. Notice had been sent out to people about the relief they were eligible for. 16 million people 16 million people had already been approved. The money was literally about to go out the door. And then Republican elected officials and special interests stepped in. They said, no, no. Literally snatching from the hands of millions of Americans thousands of dollars in student debt relief that was about to change their lives. You know, these Republican officials just couldn't bear the thought of providing relief for working class, middle class Americans. Republican state officials sued my administration, attempting to block relief, including millions of their own constituents. Republicans in Congress voted to overturn the plan. I think every one. I don't think I had any Republican votes for this plan. At the same time, think about this. We all supported the Paycheck Protection Program. Remember PPP? You know, which was designed to help business owners who lost money because of the pandemic. It was a worthy program. But let's be clear. Some of the same elected Republicans, members of Congress who strongly opposed giving relief to students, got hundreds of thousands of dollars themselves in relief, members of Congress, because of the businesses they were able to keep open. Several members of Congress got over $1 million. All those loans were forgiven. You know how much that program cost? $760 billion. My program's too expensive. $360 billion more than I proposed in my student debt relief program. I was trying to provide students with $10,000 to $20,000 in relief. By comparison, the average amount forgiven in the PPP, the pandemic loan program, average amount forgiven was $70,000. Now a kid making $60,000, trying to pay back his bills, asking for $10,000 in relief? Come on. The hypocrisy is stunning. You can't help a family making $75 grand a year, but you can help a millionaire and you have your debt forgiven? My plan would not only have been life-changing for millions of Americans, it would have been good for the American economy. Freeing millions of Americans from the crushing burden of student debt. More homes would have been bought, more businesses would have been started, more couples would have had the confidence to start a family. Millions of people would have felt they could get on with their lives. These Republicans blocked all that. Now, in addition to the hypocrisy, some of these Republicans in Congress are shamelessly pushing to advance a bill in the coming weeks that gives hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks and handouts to the wealthiest Americans. They still haven't given up on making permanent a $2 trillion tax cut that they never paid for. Never paid for. $2 trillion. So let me be clear. For Republicans in Congress, it's not about reducing the deficit. It's not about fairness in forgiving loans. It's only about forgiving loans they have to pay. Today, the Supreme Court sided with them. I believe the court's decision to strike and find a new way. And we're moving as fast as we can. First, I'm announcing today a new path consistent with today's ruling to provide student debt relief to as many borrowers as possible, as quickly as possible. We will ground this new approach in a different law than my original plan, the so-called Higher Education Act. That will allow Secretary Cardona, who's with me today, to compromise, waive, or release loans under certain circumstances. This new path is legally sound. It's going to take longer, but in my view, it's the best path that remains to providing for as many borrowers as possible with debt relief. I've directed my team to move as quickly as possible under the law. Just moments ago, Secretary Cardona took the first step to initiate that new approach. We're not going to waste any time on this. We're getting moving on it. It's going to take longer, but we're getting at it right away. Second, we know what many borrowers will need to make their hard choices, which their budgets are being strained now when they start to repay their monthly loan payments this fall. You know, we know that figuring out how to pay these added expenses can take time for borrowers, and they might miss payments at the front end as they get back into repayment. Normally, this could lead borrowers to fall into delinquency and default. But without their it will hurt their financial security, and that's not good for them or the economy. That's why we're creating a temporary 12-month, what we're calling on-ramp repayment program. And now, this is not the same as a student loan pause. It's been in effect for the past 3 years. Monthly payments will be due. Bills will not go out, and interest will be accruing. And during this period, if you can pay your monthly bills, you should. But if you cannot, if you miss payments, this on-ramp will temporarily remove the threat of default or having your credit harmed, which can hurt borrowers for years to come. Because the Department of Education won't refer borrowers. And the reason why that will work, they won't refer borrowers who miss payments to credit agencies for 12 months to give them a chance to get back up and running. Let me close with this. Our Republican officials say student loan relief is a giveaway to the privileged. You hear that loud now, the privileged. I love the concern for the privileged. But I know who student loan borrowers are in this country. So do all you. The couple putting off having a child until they can find their way to deal with their debt. That's who they are. They're young putting off buying their first home until they can get out from under student loans. Hope on the horizon, thanks to relief that I planned last year. Today's court decision snatches it away from them. I get it. I get it. I hear this. And I'm concerned about it. But today's decision has closed one path. Now we're going to pursue another. I'm never going to stop fighting for you. We'll use every tool at our disposal to get you the student debt relief you need and reach your dreams. It's good for the economy. It's good for the country. It's going to be good for you. Thank you very, very much for listening. We're going to get this done, God willing. Thank you.
Mr. President, why did you give millions of borrowers false hope? You've doubted your own authority here in the past.
I didn't give any false hope. The question was whether or not I would do even more than was requested. What I did, I thought was appropriate and was able to be done and would get done. I didn't give borrowers false hope, but the Republicans snatched away the hope that they were given, and it's real hope. Thank you.
Mr. President, will you cancel student debt?
Your authority. Did you overstep your authority?
I think the court misinterpreted the Constitution.
Mr. President, do you admit failure in Afghanistan? Mistakes. There was a report on Afghanistan withdrawal saying there was failure, mistakes. Do you admit there was mistakes during the withdrawal and before?
No, all the evidence is coming back together. Remember what I said about Afghanistan? I said Al-Qaeda would not be there. I said it wouldn't be there. I said we'd get help from the Taliban. What's happening now? What's going on? Read your press. I was right. Thanks.
So the report is from the State Department, actually, about the withdrawal.
Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett is with me now. We'll leave aside the comment there at the end about Afghanistan.
Right.
But this was there's a lot going on today. What did you take away, both politically and substantively, from the president?
Okay, the opening part of the president's remarks were all about the politics, accusing Republicans of hypocrisy, special interests of getting involved. The key question before the court was a substantive matter. Did the Education Department, under the president's authority, have the right, under a 2003 law, to cancel student debt? Those who wrote the law sent a brief to the Supreme Court and said, no, we wrote the law. We never intended to give any executive this much authority to waive this much in student debt. And that's what the court ruled. What the president said was, we're going to try to find other ways. He referred to the Higher Education Act. Why is this important to the audience? And why did the president say repeatedly, will take time? The HEROES Act 2003, which this administration had cited to give it authority to cancel this debt, is an emergency. You can do so with emergency powers when there's a national emergency. The Higher Education Act has no such language, which means it is subject to federal regulatory review and comment. That's a much longer process, John. And when the president said it's going to take a while to move as fast as they can only move as fast as that regulatory process, which has very specific guidelines and hurdles, can go. So it's going to be a while on that.
And there will no doubt be legal challenges to whether the Secretary of Education using the Higher Education
Because it's never been used this way before. So yes, there will be challenges to that. But on this matter, they put it before the court, and the court looked at the law and said, no, Congress did not grant this authority. You overstepped it. The president said it was a misinterpretation of the Constitution. This really wasn't a constitutional question. This was, what did the law say? What did Congress intend? And did an executive branch read into a law something that didn't exist?
Christina Ruffini is joining us now from the White House. Christina, the president said the Supreme Court had closed one path, but he was going to take another. Clearly, the political message from this event was, I'm going to do everything possible to keep working on this issue, which was one of his biggest promises, very important to a number of different constituencies. What did you hear in the president's remarks?
That's right. And at the moment, it's a little bit short on details. Major mentioned the president promised to use the Higher Education Act to try to take action, but didn't say what exactly that would be, just that he'd ordered his staff to work on it as quickly as possible. He also mentioned one other thing, and that's an on-ramp for borrowers who are going to have to restart those student loan payments in September. He said they will still get bills mailed out. They will still have to make their payments, but if they don't, it won't put them into automatic default and it won't impact their credit rating. It's kind of a soft launch of people who may be struggling trying to get back into these loan repayment programs. The other thing that stood out to me, John, is how many times he criticized Republicans. He accused them in the exact word of being hypocrites, saying many of the same Republicans who are opposing student loan debt forgiveness got huge government handouts from the Paycheck Protection Plan during COVID, and saying that you can't support one and not support the other without being guilty of hypocrisy. So as you mentioned, the student loan forgiveness was a big part of the Biden campaign. It was a big campaign promise, and he's blaming Republicans outright for, he says, going after this and taking it away from millions of Americans who really needed that debt relief.
Major, one other thing the president said a couple of different ways. He wanted to make very sure that everybody heard his argument that this plan was good for the economy. There is not universal agreement that that is the case.
Right. There is some fear, and even it was expressed by the president's own Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, that if this had been approved and gone through, it might have had inflationary impacts. And of course, everyone who has a student loan in this country since March of 2020, since COVID began, has not had to make a debt payment. And there's been no penalties because of that. It was forgiven by or forbearance is the key word, by the Trump administration and the Biden administration. And as Christina accurately pointed out, those payments, interest will start accruing in September. They have to be paid October 1st. But in that time, people have had lots of money to spend on the economy that they would have otherwise had to pay for their student loans. That has had an inflationary effect as well. Everything in this space affects the economy, directly or indirectly. And for those who were counting on this debt relief, they're going to have to rearrange their finances now, because this thing that was promised and they might have been expecting will not come their way.
That's right. Thank you, Major. Thank you, Christina. Once again, President Biden laid out new plans to help student borrowers after the Supreme Court struck down his administration's plan to provide loan relief for millions of Americans, ruling it is not constitutional. Our coverage will continue on CBS News Streaming, your local news, and tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm John Dickerson.
You have been watching a CBS News special report where President Biden was talking about the Supreme Court's ruling on his student debt relief plan.
The president said he disagrees with the decision and blamed Republicans for taking money out of the pockets of hardworking Americans, in his words. The president was asked by reporters if he gave borrowers false hope. He denied that idea, saying it was Republicans who, quote, smashed away hope, and he pledged to continue fighting for debt relief.
Nicole Killian and Evan Kamenker join us now. Nicole is a CBS News congressional correspondent. Evan is a professor and dean emeritus at the University of Michigan Law School. Welcome to you both. Nicole, let me start with you. As we said, the president said that he did not provide false hope about his student debt relief plan. How do some of his fellow Democrats feel about that?
Well, I mean, keep in mind, and you heard the president there explain, look, we had already started to stand up this program. Some 16 million borrowers had already been approved. So to his point, I mean, things were in the works to start making those payments. Obviously, the program was challenged, which brings us to today with the Supreme Court basically striking down this program and saying that it didn't fall within the purview of the law. So that being said, as you heard the president say, I mean, now it's all about pivoting. And I think, you know, many progressive Democrats have encouraged the president to use whatever tools he has at his disposal, whether it is through this Higher Education Act, which we heard the president reference today, or through other means. And so that really has been the response from many Democrats, in part and parcel. Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries saying that House Democrats are going to continue to work with the Biden administration, because clearly there is a mutual interest here in trying to restore some components of this program if they can.
Evan, I want to bring you into this conversation because given both your position as somebody in the higher education space and as an expert on law, when we hear Nicole discussing that the president wants to pivot to other means, what legally can he do at this point to try and still fulfill those campaign promises to student borrowers?
Well, this really was a case directly about statutory construction. So the real question is exactly what are the details of the proposals he wants to now shift to, and how does that square with the Higher Education Act's authority for him to act? Even though this was about what the statute meant, there are constitutional overtones because this court today and last year has been generally narrowing the authority of executive agencies to use broad language in congressional statutes as a platform for changing social or economic policy. The court has basically said when there's a new plan that has significant economic or political consequences, Congress has to be pretty clear that it's authorizing the agency to engage in that kind of programming. So the real question is, this kind of slimmed down set of proposals, are they still going to be viewed by the courts as having significant economic and political consequences? And how clearly does the Higher Education Act actually authorize the executive agency to do the twists, the changes that the president wants to do now?
Nicole, on the legislative front, what's the appetite looking like on this issue on Capitol Hill? Is there any talk of passing student debt relief legislation with the president's plan struck down?
Well, look, there have been a number of pieces of legislation, and the president referenced some of that. I mean, certainly since House Republicans have taken over the majority, they actually tried to strike down this program legislatively by trying to roll back the rule that enabled it in the Department of Education. And they actually were successful with some Democratic support, both in the House and the Senate, in passing this resolution, which ultimately the president vetoed just recently, and then it failed to get an override in the House. So that is, Republicans were already trying to make inroads in terms of doing away with this program if they could, which is why many of them are now praising this decision today by the Supreme Court. But there are other measures that have either already been introduced or could be introduced in light of this. For instance, you have progressive lawmakers like Bernie Sanders, Pramila Jayapal, who have introduced legislation to try to make a college tuition free for community colleges and also to provide some more debt relief forgiveness to other students, and there are some Republicans who have proposed legislation as well just to make things a little easier for borrowers in terms of repayment. But, that legislation, for instance, there's something that John Cornyn has proposed, is more targeted at certain borrowers as opposed to taking more of this writ large approach that the president's debt relief plan was expected to do.
Evan, I want to shift gears because there was another major decision that was handed down by the Supreme Court today. That was about LGBTQ plus protections. A lot of people have made this comparison to the 2018 Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado civil rights decision that the Supreme Court upheld, that cake maker did not need to make a wedding cake for a gay couple. And that the basis of that is different from what they're saying now. I hope that you can walk us through those distinctions, how those cases are different. And I'm hoping that you can tell us a little bit more about whether or not this creates a loophole, which is the concern among LGBTQ plus rights proponents, that discrimination will be legal against that group based on religious grounds.
Well, I would be concerned as that community is now concerned. The major difference between the two cases is that the Masterpiece case was based on the idea of free exercise of religion, and today's case was based on freedom of speech. That case was based on the religious feelings of the person who was asked to bake a special kind of cake. Today's was based on the graphic designer's view that she didn't want to speak, in her views, in favor of gay marriage. That was something she thought that her wedding website design would essentially endorse. In both cases, the court is moving towards a principle that allows people more freedom to control what they say and what they do, even if they're operating in the economic marketplace, even when states have, as they all do, statutes that say, if you hold yourself out, if you want to join the economic world, you want to join the marketplace, you have to serve all customers equally. You're not allowed to pick and choose in a discriminatory way which customers you want to choose and which customers you don't want to choose. So the court is starting, unfortunately, to face this tension between the desire on the one hand to say to people, you know, we don't want you to compromise your religious or even your personal beliefs just because you are running a business. On the other hand, how do we protect the patrons of the business who shouldn't be discriminated against on the basis of who they are or what they believe? This court is clearly staking out a position protecting the individual's business people at the expense of the customers.
All right. Well, we will have to see where it then leads from here. That is the end of this Supreme Court term. Nicole Killian, Evan Kamiker, thank you very much.
We are going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more news.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is